for wildlife. And a little bit of information about Mr. Otte. He grew up on a family farm in York County, Nebraska. He attended and received 2 degrees from the University of Nebraska, a BS in agronomy and crop production in 1979, and an MS in agronomy in plant breeding and genetics in 1981. He has been employed by the Geary County Extension Office since 1982. Chuck has the sole programming responsibilities for agriculture, horticulture, and natural resources for Geary County, Kansas. He has been the Geary County Extension agent for, get this, 39 years. He served as the president of the National Association of County Agricultural Agents in 2007 and served as chairman of the Junction City Geary County Metropolitan Planning Commission for 4 years, serving on the commission for a total of 9. Chuck is a past president of the Kansas Ornithological Society and currently the recording secretary and newsletter for KOS, a position he has held for over 15 years. Chuck also serves as secretary of the Kansas Ornithological Society and Kansas Bird Records Committee. He also served as chairman of the Kansas Non-Game Wildlife Advisory Council and advisory council to the secretary of the Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks. He has co-authored 2 books about Kansas birds, as well as several magazine articles about birds and birding. His hobbies include bird watching, very importantly, gardening, travel, and cooking. And with that, I turn this over to Mr. Otte. Thank you so much.
Good morning, and thank you for that. I really need to update that because I just realized it's 39. It's actually hit 40th anniversary earlier this year. So, and not to embarrass anybody, but my last name is pronounced Otte. It rhymes with naughty. Once you get to know me, it's very easy to remember. Yeah. So anyway, we probably could have condensed that all down to just one statement. I've been a bird watcher since I was 4 years old. My mother was a bird watcher. My grandmother was a bird watcher. I was genetically predisposed. I never had a chance. I was going to be a bird watcher. But enough of that. Let's get on with the program here. Let me get the screen shared. Hey, there we go. It's working. Love it when this happens. Landscaping for wildlife. We can call this any number of things. I like to call it take a walk on the wild side. But what we want to do, if I can get my screen to advance here. Okay, come on, wake up here. There we go. You can call it birdscaping. You can call it wildscaping. I think wildscaping, I realized a few years ago, was a trademark name or something. So I changed it to birdscaping. But all you're trying to do is create a bird and wildlife friendly yard to bring the critters in closer to you. This is not the same as naturalistic landscaping. In naturalistic landscaping, if you live out in the middle of a prairie, you're going to make your landscape look like a prairie. If you live in an eastern deciduous forest setting, you're going to make it look like an eastern deciduous forest. So what I'm talking about is a very manipulated landscape, simply trying to make it as attractive to wildlife as you possibly can. I'm big about rules, sort of. I'm not going to show you any specific landscape plans at all. I say asking questions is encouraged and expected. I will re-echo what the folks said earlier. If a question comes into your mind, type it down in the chat so you don't lose it. I will admit that I'm to that age where if a question comes into my mind, I've got about a 30-second window of opportunity and then it's gone. So type it down in the chat. That way it won't be forgotten. And then I'll stay online as long as possible afterwards today to answer any questions that may come up. Keep in mind, what I'm going to show you may violate some traditional classical landscape principles. I am not a landscape architect. I never took a landscape design, formal design class in my life. I'm just talking about what can you do that makes some sense. It kind of follows along with some of these principles, but making your yard, your place of residence, as friendly as possible. Some of the ideas may also violate your neighbor's sense of good landscaping and tolerance, maybe even your own family's. For example, if this is your neighborhood, and wasn't my house, but that was the neighborhood I lived in for over 30 years. If you live there and you try to have a backyard like this, yeah, you may be hearing from the homeowners association or at least the neighbors. That was not my backyard either. That was a friend's house in Manhattan. But it's just know what you can get by with, know what your neighbors will tolerate, what the homeowners association may tolerate, what your family may tolerate. As humans, we have a problem. We are a very logical thinking species. We try to look at a situation, formulate it into a question, and then problem solve it through. Animals don't do that. It's flight or fright. Yeah, there's some instances where certain members of the corvid family, crows, jays, ravens, can do some basic problem solving. But the first thing when struck with something new, it's either going to be fight or flight. That's as old as time itself. So it's you got to get past the logical phase and get into the reaction phase. If I was a bird out in this environment and this happened, what would I do? Encourage people to sit outside their own home sometimes and listen to all the noises that come from their house. They may be astounded at how much you hear outside the house. I encourage you to spend time watching birds, watching wildlife behavior. How do they act and behave at different times of the year, at different times of the day? Where are they? What are they doing? I mean, outside my house right now here on the farm, I've got a lot of bird activity. It's spring. They're getting cranked up here. They're hitting the bird feeder, the bird bath. They're just all over the place. A lot of what any creature does comes down to two things: food and sex. They need to eat, they need to drink, they need to reproduce. Very powerful biological urges. And so much of what they do comes down to these two things. This time of year, the days are getting longer. That starts triggering the hormones so that they start to think about nesting, about raising young. Birds that have been in Central America and South America are already moving this way. They have no idea what the weather is up here, but they're instinctively going, the day length is changing. I got to be on the move. So just spend some time watching them. Not only that, some of these birds are real characters. They're a lot of fun to watch. Birds have the same basic needs that you and I do. They need water, they need food, they need cover or shelter from weather and predators, resting and roosting locations, nesting and brood rearing locations. Same basic needs that all creatures have: food, water, shelter. And water, quite honestly, is often the very first thing that comes up. Kansas can be a very semi-arid state. The entire state is in some stage of drought right now. So free water, open water, can be a real challenge, especially in the winter. I mean, if we think back to last February, how brutally cold it was for how long. This winter hasn't been quite so bad. So simply having a bird bath with a heater in it can be very, very helpful and be a big draw to a lot of species that may not come into your backyard otherwise. Food can come in many different forms. It may be, in this case, a little food trough that has sunflower seeds in it for this black-capped chickadee. You know, it may be the redbud tree that has some dead branches in it this little downy woodpecker is coming up on. You know, and shelter can be nothing more than just a real tangled backyard. This was my yard in town, and I did drive my neighbors crazy on a regular basis. But, you know, shelter, protection, put as many obstacles between the bird and the predator as you can. Okay, some theorems. These are Chuck's theorems on birdscaping. If you plant it, they will come. But you don't know what you're going to get. It may have 2 legs and wings. It may have 4 legs, 6 legs, 8 legs, no legs. And also your landscaping may not help any creature survive the seasons better, although the more of us that do it, the better chance they have. You're also doing this because you want to get them in closer where you can watch them. Why do we put up hummingbird feeders? So we can get those little aerobatic jewels close enough that we can actually watch them. Going back to my first point, if you plant it, they will come. Keep in mind that you may have a bird bath out there for the birds, but on a hot summer day, the squirrel may need to take care of it. It may need to use it also. This little guy sat out there for about 30 minutes one hot day last August. It was absolutely hilarious. We'd walk up to the window, and I swear it would look up at us and then just go back to kind of hanging out in the water. So, and you may be putting bird feed out for the birds again, but you may wind up with a raccoon or a possum coming into your feeders. And this is right outside my living room window. You know, as long as they're not destroying anything, I don't worry about it. Possums I'm very tolerant of. Raccoons can be very destructive. That's a whole nother topic, but as long as they're leaving my feeders hanging, I'll leave them alone and give them a little bit of extra food. Shelter. It's not just one thing. Take a look at the natural world around you and how diverse the woods are, how diverse the prairie is. I always say that prairies are subtle. You know, mountains and oceans slap you in the face. Prairies, you've got to immerse yourself in, and there's a lot of subtlety, there's a lot of species richness there. So that diversity, the mix of trees, shrubs, perennials, all of that will give you a greater number of species and a greater total number of wildlife. So you want to try to find that combination that works well for you. The edge effect, where you have a big enough lot, you can create spaces, outdoor rooms, if you will, of miniature prairies with open space for maybe bluebirds, and then some timber areas where two different ecosystems meet. And in Kansas, that's quite often woodlands and grasslands. We get an increase in activity. The woodland species come out into the grass to forage. The grassland species may dash into the timber for protection at some point in time. And there's a lot of specialists at the edge. Bluebirds are one of those that historically they nested in old woodpecker cavities in trees. So they'd be on the edge of the tree line, but they wanted that big lawn in front of them where they could go out and grab their caterpillars and food for their young. This is out here at Milford Lake. I can look out my second floor window here right now and see Milford Lake because there aren't leaves on the trees, but they've done a really good job with having a lot of mixing of ecosystems. The wooded area, the draws, cedars in there, and there's some redbuds and others, you know, that works its way on down to the lake. And when you get up kind of in the upland area, they've maintained it as grass. They burn that periodically. And if you look right in here, there's actually a little area that they till every year, and they may plant it to sunflowers, they may plant it to corn, they may plant it to milo or grain sorghum. And the whole purpose is they're not going to fertilize it, they're not going to control weeds, but that becomes a food plot area. So this mixing of needs and uses can really attract a lot of species. Okay, in smaller urban lots, and when we lived in town for 30 plus years, I literally lived on a 5,000 square foot lot. So it was small. I was very limited on what I could do there. But here are some basic things that I encourage to have. Have large trees on the perimeter, on the corners of your lot, whatever works. Smaller trees and shrubs closer to the house. You want to create what I call safe travel lanes. Birds don't come in a squadron at 500 feet and bank and go down to your feeders immediately. They come into the tops of the tallest trees, and they're looking around for any kind of threats, for any food source, for any water source. If they see something, they'll start working their way on down. So they're trying to keep on the lookout for any threats, airborne hawks, on the ground snakes or cats. So you want to have not only safe travel lanes to get down to the food and water, but escape routes if they're threatened by something. And then here's what I've got in mind. Here was a lacebark elm, and here was an old cottonwood that was about to die. Got a couple of little apple trees right next to the deck here, and I've got an arborvitae and boxwood. I've got last year's Christmas tree here, something I'm still doing. I've actually got 2 years worth right now. But they can come to the tops of these trees, and then they can start dropping their way down. And if something shows up a hawk or a cat, they can dash into the evergreens. They can get up out of the way of the cat. You know, the threats are basically going to be terrestrial or aerial. So if it's aerial, a hawk, they're going to go into the deepest cover they can find as quick as possible. Put as many obstacles between them as possible. If it's a cat, if it's a snake, everything's going to go straight up. Sometimes it's really kind of fun that if you've been looking out at your feeders and you've been having bird activity all morning, and you look at it again and there's nothing except maybe one poor little goldfinch still sitting on the finch feeder and it's just frozen and not moving, there's probably a hawk nearby. And because of the way that hawks hunt, they're very tuned in on motion. As long as that bird doesn't panic and fly, it's probably going to be safe. So if you go outside and cautiously start looking around, you're liable to find a sharp-shinned hawk or a Cooper's hawk, the two most likely feeder raiders that we're going to have in our yards. So it's make safe travel lanes, make escape routes. Okay, I already talked about that. Evergreens for windbreaks on the north and the west. Usually our prevailing winds in the winter are definitely going to come from the west and the north. In the south, in the summer, they're going to come from the south, southwest. So you can use those to just slow down the flow of air through your property, through your yard. Also creates microclimates for different things that you may want to plant. Evergreens make good cover close to feeders. They don't have to be pines or spruces or junipers. They can be holly. They can be boxwood. Deciduous evergreens work excellently also. This is something that all of us gardeners probably have to deal with, myself included. There's this sense that we get, this urge that after we've had a couple of hard freezes in the fall, I'm going to clean it up. I'm going to make it pristine and look good. So I'm ready to go next spring. Okay, in the vegetable garden, I can dig that. I tilled my garden last fall. But around the house with everything else, leave those old annuals, leave those old perennials for cover, for food, and even wait on into the spring for a while. I mean, it's not just the birds, but it's all sorts of little mammals. It could be insects, butterflies, moths, and other things, ladybugs. Need that cover and shelter. And then when the birds start coming back this time of year and start looking for nesting material, they'll go to those dead plants, those dead stems from last year, and start to strip fibers out of them to start making their nest with. If you ever look at say, a Baltimore Oriole nest, the pendulous hanging thing in the trees, it's not made up of fresh material. It's old dead fibers that they're getting from someplace. So even when it gets time to clean up, maybe you tie things together and hang them on the fence, or put a little pile over on the side, so that you can just have something, some place for them to go and get fibers from. You know, this was my backyard in town. All of these sunflowers along the fence, I didn't plant a single one of those every year. Those were just sunflower seeds from the feeder that got dropped. And I'd leave them there, and the petals would still be on them, and the goldfinches would be in the blossoms. And this time of year, the little downy woodpeckers would be going up and down on the stalks, just looking for any kind of little boring insects in there. And just, I know the neighbors would drive by going, why isn't he ever going to clean that up? And I eventually would, but don't be in a hurry. Coming up, I'm going to talk about a bunch of slides, and just literally any place you see bird, you can replace bird with almost any species name, wildlife, whatever. But there's a lot of plants that are going to have a lot of utility to many different species. Birds, being a flying species, are very tuned into that, because that's where they nest, where a lot of the species nest, and where they get a lot of their food. So with that in mind, bird-friendly plants, think food. Some things we plant for the food because of the berries that are on them. Some aren't so much the berries that are on them, but the insects that may be feeding on them at different times of the year. We'll talk about that. See where the birds are and what they are eating. Flowering crab apples. Get one that holds a lot of fruit and then maintains it through the year. Big draw for things like cedar waxwings and robins. Think about cover. What do the different species need? Think nesting, think reproduction. Native adapted plants. We've got a lot of plants in our landscape that are not native, but they also haven't become problems. But we also have a lot of non-native alien invaders. I've got a slide later on about those two that are in my crosshairs right now. The other thing is, remember that we live in a prairie state. It can be hot, it can be dry, and it will be windy at any time of the year. Today's a beautiful day. It's going to get windy tomorrow afternoon. So just remember where we are. And I always chuckle. I take a lot of magazines. I read a lot of magazines, and I'll be reading a magazine about a good plants for a hot location. And I look at this list and I say, well, they're obviously talking about a hot location in Boston, because you put those in a hot location in Kansas, you can just, they're toast, they're gone. And just remember that many species are naturally aggressive. I think for years, we have been plagued with this British idea of what proper landscaping is. And so a lot of the plants that people were asking for at the nurseries were what they were seeing from England that then came in the 16th, 17th, 18th century to the US and so forth. And we need to start thinking more and more and more about what are these native plants that we could be using. And there are so many wonderful native plants that are just now starting to become available in the marketplace. My number one favorite plant is Eastern Red Cedar. All my farmer rancher friends just shudder every time I talk about planting more cedar trees, because one of the same things that makes it a good wildlife plant makes it despised by pasture managers. Here we go. Eastern Red Cedar. You know, you can look at this and see the little blue berries on them, only they aren't technically berries, they're cones or something else. But anyway, you know, a pasture manager looks at that and goes, oh, look at all those little seedling cedar trees I'm going to have to cut off or burn off. I can look at that and see, look at all that bird food for bluebirds, for robins, for cedar waxwings. Somebody else may look at that and say, look at all that flavoring for gin. You know, it just depends on your perspective. But Eastern Red Cedar is our only native evergreen in Kansas. We have no native pines or spruces, just the good old eastern red cedar. And it is a survivor. It can take a lot of drought. Fire is its enemy, so fire becomes a tool to control it in the pastures. Hackberry, it's native. In urban settings, it can be invasive. It can be invasive for the same reason that cedar trees can be invasive. They have lots of small round seeds, and the wildlife, the birds, love them. And they eat them. They digest the pulp off of them. The seed goes on through, with usually planted or placed on the ground with a little bit of fertilizer, and it's ready to go. Hackberries are sort of short-lived, and a lot of the reason for that, especially in urban settings, is they get pruned poorly, and hackberries are prone to a lot of internal rots. So if you've got one and you can just leave it alone, make sure it's away from the house, you can expect 40, 50, maybe 60 years, at which point it'll probably start to fall to pieces. That's just the nature of it. We think of trees living forever, and a lot of our tree species are not that long-lived. The leaves will attract a lot of small insects, especially the hackberry gall, hackberry nipple gall maker, a hackberry psyllid. Doesn't really harm the trees. That's what causes the hackberry leaves to have all those little bumps on them. When they emerge as adults in the fall, they will sometimes swarm to the sides of houses onto screens, and they can be a nuisance. They get inside the house, they fly around, and then they die. They're not going to cause any damage, but plant it away from the house. Flowering crabapple in the 1970s seemed to have fallen out of favor because of the ornamental pears. First the Bradford pear, and then all the others. And we need to forget the ornamental pears and go back to the flowering crabapple. In all my years of being an extension agent here, I have seen a handful of volunteer apple trees. I can take you to locations and show you solid thickets of volunteer ornamental pears. So I think we need to go back to the flowering crabs, forget the ornamental pears, choose one that bears a lot of fruit and retains it well, because that is what the birds, the wildlife, are going to be eating as we get into winter, and then even this time of year. They can be plagued by cedar apple rust and apple scab. So you want to find a variety that is resistant to both of those. K-State Research and Extension has an outstanding multi-page bulletin that lists just a lot of cultivars, what their shape is, what their size is, what the flower color is. If you want some flower color but you don't want fruit, there are even some that are sterile. So there's a lot of options here. Take a look at that bulletin, get those ornamental pears cut down, replace them with a flowering crabapple. Eastern redbud, it's native. But if you think about where it grows in the wild, it's an understory tree. It's on the edge of the timber. It leaves out fairly early. It blooms too early to be of even benefit for the hummingbirds coming through. But hummingbirds love this tree because in the late summer, the undersides of the leaves are just loaded with little lace bugs and plant bugs. And the hummingbirds have to have protein like everything else. You can't live on candy alone. So they'll fly up and they'll start picking off those little insects off the bottoms of the leaves. It's a small tree. It's good for close to house. But where do we often plant it? Right out in full sun, in full wind. And that really shortens the life of this tree. Redbuds, I normally figure 20, 30 years, redbuds are going to start falling apart also. I've seen some old redbuds that are 30 and 40 years old. Those are more the exception than the rule. So just know that you may have to plant, you may plant one 20 years from now, you may need to be replacing it. But there's a lot of, you can just go out in the timber if you have a source and dig one up there tough. You can get some really nice, attractive versions of it. At nurseries, there's also a white flowered version of one, which is appropriately called white bud, but I just called it a white flowered red bud. Good plant. Roughleaf dogwood. This is a shrub. Plant it where you have a lot of room because it's going to run. It has root shoots that keep coming up. It's a big invasive pest in pastures because we took fire out for too many years. But this crazy plant, you can see the little white berries down here. In August and September, when songbirds are heading south, these thickets, and I can find them 50, 60, 100 feet long, are just full of birds because they're in there eating those very nutritious berries. Good late summer food source, but like I said, it's going to run. So if you've got a small lot, do not put it in a 5,000 square foot lot in town. I'm out of the farm now. My wife grew up here. We've got lots of room, and we've got we've got rough leaf dogwood thickets all over the place. Virginia creeper. It's a native vine. Has little purplish clusters of berries on it that are used by a lot of species. And it's also a gorgeous plant in early fall, late summer. Those leaves turn red, as you can see in the picture here on the lower left. People get concerned that it's going to smother and kill the tree. I've never really seen that happen. It may block out a little bit of a few needles up here for some photosynthesis. People say, well, I saw it climbing on a cottonwood tree and the cottonwood tree was dead, so it obviously killed it. No, the cottonwood tree died of something else. And it's just, you know, the vine is now holding it up. Be aware that poison ivy will tend to grow in the same location. So always pay attention. You know, here we've got a good example. There's my cursor. 5 leaflets. It's a compound leaf with 5 leaflets all coming off from a central point. So we'll call it palmately compound. Poison ivy will only have 3 leaflets. So leaves of 3, let it be. Leaves of 5, stay alive. I don't know. Make up your own poem for that. But it's a good vine. If it's you're probably not going to go out and plant it, but if one's coming up someplace, let it grow. It's not a problem. Should be planting more of these, and I need to update this and get pictures of all of these, but just some more that are good wildlife plants. Serviceberry or Juneberry. Red twig dogwood is an ornamental, very similar to the rough leaf dogwood, but it has this nice reddish stem in it that gives nice accent in the wintertime. There's also a yellow twig dogwood. American holly is there with question marks. It's native to extreme southeastern Kansas. You get very much further west than, say, Salina, you're going to be hard-pressed to keep it alive because it's just going to get scorched so bad. My county agent friends in North Carolina curse this plant because it spreads just like cedar trees do around here. And if you want to know what uncomfortable is, just be working in the garden and kneel down on a holly leaf with all those nice little sharp spines on it. So just proceed with caution. Winterberry is a deciduous holly, another really neat plant. Buffalo berry, and I've got poison ivy down here. Don't go to the nursery and ask to buy a poison ivy plant. You'll be laughed out of there or looked at like you're crazy. Poison ivy is a very good wildlife plant. Humans are the only species that react negatively to the oil in the sap. The berries are readily eaten by birds. The leaves are readily eaten by deer. It's tough survivor. It's another native plant. If you've got a larger lot and you've got some poison ivy out on the periphery of it where nobody's going to go, let it be. Just leave it alone. If it's where people are going to run into it, you know, if you see seedlings coming up, yep, carefully pull them out because the birds planted the seedlings because they ate the berries. But it is a good wildlife plant, and if it's out there not hurting anybody, be aware of it, keep people away from it, and just let it go. In larger plantings with lots of space. Bur oak, one of our white oaks, native, it's strong, it will outlive us. There's the old saying that you plant trees not for yourself but for your children. This one you plant for your grandchildren because it can easily go 2 to 3 centuries. Slow to moderate growth rate. If you plant a bur oak, if you keep the grass away from it, keep it mulched, keep it watered, keep it fertilized, you can get 18 to 24 inches of upwards growth a year. It's really amazing. It's what we call a good mast crop tree. Mast crop is another word for acorns. It's a larger acorn. Blue jays aren't probably going to pick this up, but wild turkey will, deer will. But it's something that can really be a beautiful addition to any landscape. Red oaks, also native to eastern Kansas, southeastern Kansas, and there's several different species. I a lot of times recommend northern red oak. I've got a northern red oak planted out here on the farm. It's faster growing. You can get 2 to 3 feet of vertical growth a year out of a red oak. It's still very strong. The acorns are smaller than the bur oaks, you know, probably a third the size, so there's more species that can use it. Bur oak tends to be a very open spreading tree. The red oak can be a little bit more pyramidal. Like I said, it's still very, very strong. Mine was out here in that full 100-mile-an-hour wind back on December 15th and came through just fine. Once again, it's a native tree. Sycamore, or also known as American plane or London plane. These are big trees. the exfoliating bark, that's that bark that peels off the outside edge. It's very attractive. It can be very messy. If you get a big tree, you're going to be cleaning up bark all the time. I say it's moderate strength wood. Quite honestly, it's probably more closer to weak wooded. But this is a tree that needs deep soils. It needs a large location. You don't want to put it on a small lot. Not for up on the hills, especially. It's more likely to be found native down along the stream banks. This is another plant that the insects just love the trees. Just find a sycamore tree sometime in August and turn the leaf over, or have a friend walk underneath it and whack a branch and watch all the insects fall on them. They won't be your friend much longer, but these are insects. I've got friends out in Garden City that have not a big lot, but they've got 2 huge sycamore trees in the backyard, and the hummingbirds love them. They perch up there, they fly down to the feeders, they fly up to the leaves, and they just start picking insects off the underside. So it's a neat tree. London plane is not native. American plane of sycamore is native. Volunteers are not a problem. Sycamore will get anthracnose, a non-fatal disease. It simply kills back the branches in the spring, then it puts out new leaves and everything's fine. I think it tends to cause the branches to grow rather crooked and wavy at times. I think it gives it a lot of character. And cottonwood, our native tree. Grows big, grows fast, it's weak, and it dies young. There's very few 100-year-old cottonwoods around. A lot of them will go about 50 years. Preferred nest tree of Baltimore Oriole. But again, it needs deep space. It needs deep space. It needs deep soils. It needs a lot of space. That small lot in town that I said where we lived for over 30 years, when we moved there in the fall of 1986, there were 8 cottonwood saplings planted on that, and we were on a corner lot. So they went, I cut down all but 3 of them right away, and the other 2 made it about 15 or 20 years, and I had to cut them down because one got struck by lightning, the other 2 got taken out by drought. So you want deep soils. Probably not a tree to plant in town at all. You got 3, 5, 10 acres out in the country or on the edge of town. Yeah, you can probably plant one there. Beautiful tree. I call it the Kansas Aspen. Some years it's not very attractive, but some years those leaves are golden yellow and it's just beautiful in the fall. It's actually one of my favorite trees. Got to mention hummingbird plants here. Hummingbirds over the years have become really, I just got hung up on my headphone cord. There we go. Have become very popular putting out feeders, wanting to get plants out for them. So I put together a list of plants, and I'll go through these fairly quickly. Salvias, all kinds of salvias. The salvias like Lady in Red salvia. I've got 2 dozen of these started in my light frame in the basement right now, or just traditional red salvia. My friends that I mentioned out in Garden City, they've got about 30 pots outside their house every year filled with salvias. And I asked him, I said, Tom, why do you have so many salvia pots? He said, well, if you think about it, every fall, September, early October, we always get that first cold snap that comes in. A lot of times it'll frost or freeze things. He said, and then it warms up after that, and it's fine for another 2, 3, 4 weeks. So when that first cold spell is coming in, they move their cars out of the garage, and all the pots of flowers go into the garage until we get through the cold spell and it warms back up. They move them back out, and they've got another 2, 3, 4 weeks of blooming plants for the hummingbirds and the pollinators. So just something to consider. Agastache agastaki, hummingbird mint. I've heard it called a lot of things. I honestly don't know the correct pronunciation of it, but it's one that is a good arid country plant. Does very well in full sun, hot, windy conditions. Used to be hard to find, becoming fairly readily available in the trade now. I used to have to order out of places out west to get it, but it is available now, and really encourage you to consider it. Trumpet vine. Oh, stories I can tell you about trumpet vines. In the spring of 1987, after we moved into our place in town, I planted 1 trumpet vine plant in the backyard for hummingbirds and orioles. In the spring of 1988, I started trying to kill that 1 trumpet vine plant, and when we sold the place a year ago, it was still growing. I took one of those root sprouts that came up off of it and moved it out to the farm here. Underneath that big, massive spiral of trumpet vine, there is an old windmill tower. And in 30 years, that is what the trumpet vine has become. There was also Virginia creeper on there. And at the very base where I keep pruning back the trumpet vine so I can mow around it, you will see that there's still Virginia creeper there. This is Hummingbird Central in August and September. Birds are just flying around it. Over to the right from where I'm standing when I took this picture, there is an arbor that has 4 or 5 hummingbird feeders on it. And it's a flurry of hummingbirds all day long through about the end of September. It's got this big, deep trumpet-shaped flower. Hummingbirds do use it. I never saw that many in town. Out here, it's Hummingbird Central. So if you plant one and only one, and plant it where you've got a lot of room. It root sprouts readily. I've seen very few instances where the seeds themselves actually root and get started, but it can be aggressive. It is native. It's a native plant to the United States, but boy, it can sure take things over. Scarlet runner bean is an heirloom bean variety. It's a climbing. It allows you to garden vertically. Red flowers, very attractive to hummingbirds. You can harvest the beans after the pods dry and use them. If you ever buy one of those seed mixes for hummingbird flowering plants, there'll usually be a couple of scarlet runner beans in there. Cardinal Climber is, I hate to say it, but it's kind of like a red flowered bindweed, but it's a very frost tender plant. So it's not going to live for years and years and years. Friends in southeastern Kansas say that they occasionally have problems with it, with seed sprouting the following year. I have never had that happen in Manhattan Junction City area, but it's another one that will really climb, can cover a trellis, a pole, whatever you want to put it around, and the hummingbirds will be very attracted to it. Cardinal Flower is a native perennial. It's a wetland plant. If you've got areas that are a little bit soggy, but still get pretty good sun, this is one that does well. A little road outside of town has an unnamed creek on it, has a little patch of Cardinal Flower, and there's always hummingbirds there in the late summer around it. They nest somewhere in the area. It's a neat plant. I have never grown bee balm, but every single book that's talking about flowers for hummingbird mentions bee balm. I put it in here just as a reminder to mention that any of these plants that you plant for hummingbirds that will provide nectar for hummingbirds will attract other pollinators too. And if you happen to be one of those that are allergic to bee stings, you need to be very careful with any of these plants. Use caution. I've got a couple of very dear friends that are highly allergic to bee stings, and they still garden and plant flowering plants like crazy. And I just cringe every time. But bee balm is one of those. Butterfly bush is across the driveway from all these other plants I've talked about in my yard. And I see hummingbirds swing by and nectar on it a little bit. But I mainly just love having it because of all the butterflies that it does attract. Just remember, plant it in full sun, cut it down to about 6-inch stubs in the spring. I need to get mine cut down here this weekend maybe, but because it's going to bloom on new growth. So you want to encourage it to generate a lot of new growth in the spring. Hollyhocks. Every old farmstead across America had hollyhocks 50, 60 years ago. And then for some reason they fell out of favor. Maybe because we started tearing down all those little buildings out on the farms. But it's another plant that will attract a lot of hummingbirds. And once you get it going, it's going to be a biennial or a short-lived perennial. So it'll start to reseed, and I'd like to see get him going. I'm trying to get some going out here on the farm now that we're out here because I just love hollyhocks. Rose of Sharon, a very similar flower. It's a shrub. Tends to grow fairly upright, doesn't necessarily branch out a lot. It's a good screening shrub for if you have that neighbor that you don't really want to have to interact with very often. Plant them right along the fence line about a foot apart, and they'll make a real nice, dense shrub there so you don't have to see the neighbors and deal with them. And lastly, cannas. Cannas are just amazing. Yeah, there's a little bit of work involved because you got to dig them up in the fall, but we were in Georgia at one of the really nice gardens that they have down there one September, and they had a huge round mounded landscape bed that was just full of cannas, and the sidewalk around it, and then timber beyond that. And it was just like a war zone as you would walk around that, with hummingbirds coming and going between the trees and the cannas. So it is one that'll really attract a lot of species. hummingbirds are attracted to red. It's like a glowing neon light to them, but they will feed on other flowers, other colored flowers. It comes down to nectar quality and quantity. So red attracts them. They'll feed on other flowers, other colored flowers. Okay, here's the two that are on my hit list. We need to be getting these things out. The ornamental pears, it's their calorie pears. Their first ones were Bradford. And to fix some of the issues we had with them, they started coming out with other selections, White House, Capital, a bunch of them. And once we had more than just Bradford, they suddenly started to cross-pollinate, and then we started to have fruit on them. The birds eat the fruit, and they plant them everywhere. You know, you look at this, that is just solid Bradford pears. And when these volunteer pears come up, they have this tendency to make these very short branches that are literally thorn-like. And it can just be dangerous to walk through these things. So if you've got one in your yard, take it down. I've seen some, it may even be in Johnson County right now. There's basically a reward for them that if you have a picture of you cutting down your Bradford pear with it cut down, they will give you a new tree. So of a different species. So best way to stop is to get out of the rut is to stop digging it deeper. So get rid of the Bradford pears, and then the bush honeysuckles. You know, the Kansas Forest Service used to sell these as a wildlife plant. And then we realized how badly they were spreading. And in eastern Kansas especially, but even clear out here, there's areas where the understory in native timber is so full of bush honeysuckle, none of the native plants can come up through it. So we're really having to work on getting rid of that. That's a 20-minute talk about how you deal with that, but start by just getting them cut off and using some kind of a treatment on it, grubbing them out, whatever it is. We need to get rid of these. Other things you can do to attract wildlife to your yard: appropriate use of shelters, birdhouses, rocks or plywood in areas of the garden. Just kind of plop down and let the plants kind of grow around them. All sorts of critters will get underneath those. If you don't like lizards and snakes and like that, put it down and then never pick it back up because you don't want to know what's underneath there. Water features, misters, drippers, little artificial, waterfalls. The sound of moving water, for whatever reason, really tends to attract a lot of birds. And then you can provide nesting materials, hair from your pet, friend that cuts my wife's and my hair. She will gather up the hair from her salon every year, and she lives out in the country, and put it in mesh bags out on the clothesline, and they'll come and get it. Certain species will line their nest with hair. It could be human hair, it can be dog hair, it can be livestock hair. They don't care. Fibers, you can put fibers out, but make sure they're natural fibers. And a lot of the wild bird supply stores are starting to carry a nice collection of natural fibers now, because whenever you find these nests, there's always all these dry plant fibers in them. If you find one that also has a lot of plastic bags and stuff in it, it's probably from a gray catbird. For some reason, they have an affinity for that. And one of my closing slides is, remember, it's about having fun. You don't have to do things perfectly. You don't have to be able to name any or all of the birds that come to your yard. You can call it a redbird instead of a cardinal. You can call it a wild canary instead of a goldfinch. It doesn't matter. It's about getting these creatures closer to you and appreciating them. And I'll leave that up for just a couple of minutes. That's my contact information. Be happy to take questions by phone or by email. And let's open it up for the questions.
Great. We do have a number of questions. Thank you, Chuck. And actually, you started off with the first one that we had with talking about the natural fibers that birds collect. And Margaret was concerned about there's a controversy about putting string or yarn out, that in some instances, people are concerned about strangling.
Yeah, and a lot of times we don't want to put out 2 and 3 feet of this stuff. You may want to cut it up, and first of all, I would say look and make sure it's all natural fibers, and then cut it into short little pieces, 3 to 6 inches long. They will go ahead and what we call redding or take it down from that to get from the string and twine are made by twisting them together. They'll pull the fibers out of that. But yeah, don't put out 2, 3, 4, 5 foot long sections. Small, 2 to 3 inches, and the more supple it is, keep it shorter. The orioles will take long pieces of fiber from wherever they can find it to make their hanging nests. but let them work on that in themselves in just smaller pieces.
Great. That really clarifies that. Thank you. Another safety question, it has to do with dogs. Someone writes in that she has bird dogs that eat seed and plant material. And how do I landscape for birds and keep my dogs safe?
Oh, conflicting uses are always a problem. Yeah, that's a real challenge because dogs will eat anything. We know that. And they'll go after a lot of grain. So you can have hanging feeders within trays underneath them that are out of the dog's reach, so that you can catch that, or put the feeders where the dogs aren't. If the dogs are kept in the backyard, put the feeders in the front yard. Just literally a separation like that. You can also, instead of feeding whole seeds, you can feed just the sunflower chips and seeds themselves. A lot less waste that way. And there's not going to be very much waste underneath that. People that sometimes live in apartments or elder care facilities want to put feeders out. They're not allowed to because of the falling seeds and like that. So, they're just try to look for options like that.
Great. And then I do have a question about pears, but I think the regular commercial pear trees, the fruiting pear trees, will they attract wildlife?
Well, regular fruiting pears like a Bartlett or a Bosque or something like that. Oh, absolutely. I always have problems with blue jays getting into my pears every year. I've got fruit trees here on the farm. So yeah, and pears especially, because a lot of those pears, as they get full ripe, they become very, very soft. They're attractive to, bees, to the big gold green June beetles, and the birds will get into them and just rip them up because they are so sweet. Birds have sweet teeth, have a sweet tooth too.
They do like candy.
Exactly.
Let's see, a question about the cottonwood and sycamores. There were a number of comments about sycamore trees, but here there's Laura has a cottonwood and a sycamore within 30 to 40 feet of each other. Would the cottonwood be the better one to remove since it's closest to the houses? It's about 25 feet.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, and in the long run, sycamores are stronger than cottonwoods. And if you've got those two that close, and especially if the cottonwood's closer to the house, yeah, I would take it down and just stick with the sycamore.
Okay. And the question about Nandina, are the berries poisonous to birds?
I do not know. I'll be right honest. I'm going to make myself a note, Sharon, and I will get you an answer to that. Okay. Ever had that question before?
I have heard that, and I haven't taken the time yet to investigate about that Nandina. We have some in our demonstration gardens, and one of our master gardeners.
Yeah, as I visit about Nandina with people, I don't see it as much out here, but definitely Topeka, Lawrence, Kansas City, and further east. It's a love-hate relationship with most gardeners. They either love it or hate it.
And a question about hollyhocks. Do hollyhocks tolerate clay soil?
Yes, they're pretty tolerant as long as it's not a soggy clay soil. You need to have some fairly good drainage. If it's real soggy clay, plant Cardinal Flower.
All right, and now I'm going to turn over to the chat box here because we've got a number of them coming in. So let's see. Megan says, I've heard that there are some bird diseases from bird feeders. Is this a problem in Kansas? How and when should you clean your birdhouses?
Birdhouse or bird feeders?
Well, the first one is about bird diseases and bird feeders, but then the second question is how and when should you clean a birdhouse?
Okay, we'll take the second one first. Birdhouses, get them cleaned out now. Bluebirds are probably already nesting. If you're seeing recent activity, just let it go. Purple martin houses, get them cleaned out and probably be ready to get those up here pretty soon. I have not seen any reports of purple martins in Kansas. It's been a little bit slow coming, but I think they'll be here soon. So definitely get those cleaned out now. The bird feeder issue is very complex. We have multiple diseases that can be passed at bird feeders. The finch eye disease, conjunctivitis, is the most common one, and it generally impacts house finches and maybe goldfinches. And then you can also get, I just lost it here, cholera. I mean, there's a lot of different things, and lately now it's the avian influenza. Unless you have, and some are going to be very localized conjunctivitis is everywhere all the time. But I encourage people that if you start to see birds showing up, take everything down, clean up all the feed, all the spilled feed, wash it down, and then keep the feeders down for a couple of weeks. A couple of weeks of sunshine and Mother Nature usually gives a chance for all the organisms to be taken care of by the ultraviolet light from the sun. And it also takes time for any infected birds to basically drop out of the population. So I've been seeing some what I consider overzealous reaction to the recent avian influenza issue. Avian influenza is around all the time. It cranks up about every 7 to 10 years, like it is now. It's going to be the biggest problem in heavily flocking species like waterfowl, and then things that may feed on the waterfowl. So I just say, I with seed feeders, clean them. I'd like to see them cleaned about every 3 months. Just dump all the seed out of them, wash them out good, use a little bleach and water in there, and then set it out in the sunlight. Sunlight is underappreciated for its decontamination capability. Hummingbird feeders, do a rough cleaning every time you feed them. You change the nectar, which should be every couple of days, just to brush in some hot water. And then maybe at the start of the season or at the end of the season, do a little bleach disinfect before you put them away for the year. But seed feeders, I don't think we clean them nearly often enough. I think once a quarter would be a good idea.
Great. Thank you. Vera asks, she has a robin making a nest in her floodlight. She wants to give it a better space.
Good luck.
Yeah.
Once a bird gets it in their head that they want to nest someplace, it becomes very difficult to change their mind. About all you can do is exclude it. Robins will sometimes nest on just a little basic shell, one board down and one board out, and just a platform. They're not going to go into a house. About all you can do where they are trying to nest is to put something up there to prohibit them from nesting there. That's it. Barn swallows are the same way. As long as there are not eggs in it, you can take the nest down. If there's eggs or young, then it becomes protected, unless it's a starling, a sparrow, or a pigeon. But once before it has eggs in it, you can keep taking it down every day.
And the next question is, I'm sure you get all the time, we all see this and everybody's frustrated. Squirrels. You knew that question was coming. What? Squirrels in the yard dominating the feeders.
There is no such thing as a squirrel-proof bird feeder. I'll just tell you that much right now. They will figure it out. There's things you can do. One is to just give up and give them some corn and try to draw them away. They seem to not be as attracted to safflower seed as sunflower seed. You can get ground cayenne pepper or ground just red pepper and go out and just lace the feed with it every single day. You're going to try to light up the squirrel. Birds have different taste receptors in their mouth. They do not notice the capsaicin. It just becomes a source of vitamin A. But any mammals, possums, raccoons, squirrels, you will light them up. And you can, because you may want to kill them, but you just want to discourage them from coming to your feeder. But yeah, I mean, I've had squirrels that raid my hummingbird feeders in the summertime. I've had to deal with that occasionally, but I just normally try to, live and let live and put some ears of corn out, put a nail in a tree and stick an ear of corn on it. And a lot of times they will go to that first, but there's no surefire way to keep them out of there. The cayenne pepper in the feed will help. Be careful doing that. I was doing that on a feeder of mine one time to discourage the possums, and a gust of wind blew the cayenne pepper into my face. And I tell you what, I know why pepper spray works. That was a painful experience. Yes, be careful with that stuff. The squirrels is a perennial problem, and no one's come out. I think there's some funny videos though. There's hilarious videos. Good TikTok and YouTube videos. Watching squirrel. Yeah. You answered a question about avian flu, that it can affect other birds besides the chickens. And a question about bush honeysuckle. Is it true that bush honeysuckle's berries have no nutritional value for birds? They have some nutritional value. There have been some studies, and I've been trying to find them again, that have shown that in analysis that the bush honeysuckle berries are not as nutritious as berries from native species. I saw it once. I have not been able to re-find it. But it's one of the problems is it apparently has a high enough sugar content that it is very attractive. It's red, so that's going to get birds' attention. Birds see into the ultraviolet and the infrared. The way that birds see the world is not the way that we see the world. So that's why red just really pops at virtually all bird species, except owls that are colorblind. So they see it. They tend to be abundant berry producers, and that's a good sign to get them out of there.
Okay. Here's a bird watcher. Marty says, I'm curious what the number of species of birds seen in Kansas is up to now. The Birds of Kansas book is 473.
It's up to 484.
All right.
Kansas Bird Records Committee just accepted a record for a royal tern that was seen in Marion Reservoir last summer. So that took us up to 484.
All right. And speaking of how many birds around, Cindy asks, I've recently moved to a new farm and I'm not seeing many cardinals. What would increase their habitat?
Move next to me, apparently, because I get a lot. They like shrubs. They like a lot of shrub cover. 9 times out of 10, they are going to nest in a shrub, usually right close to a house so they can see the reflection and attack your window. But I think shrubs, sunflower seeds are a good attractant. And sometimes it just takes time to get the habitat built up. I've seen pictures from acquaintances down in the Kansas City area of in the middle of winter, they'll have 30 to 40 male cardinals underneath their feeders. I'm just like, I'm happy to get a dozen. How do they get 30 or 40? So amazing.
Mm-hmm. Another plant people are asking about in terms of attracting birds are the berry bushes, blackberries, raspberries.
Absolutely. Any of those berry bushes will attract birds. Blackberry is native to Kansas. It can be an invasive weed in some places in pastures, but where I have seen big old stands of blackberries that they've allowed to just continue to grow, there's usually a lot of birds around there as those berries ripe. 2 things with birds when it comes to fruit. They will either get it the day before you were going to pick it, or it almost has to be rotten before they'll eat it. So you just got to figure out which it is. But yeah, those native berry bushes, about the only thing I haven't seen anything eating is wild gooseberries. For some reason, I don't know if they don't get down there or what. I don't know.
Well, the squirrels got my gooseberries. I know that.
Okay, well, there you go.
What about beautyberry? Do the birds like the beautyberry?
Yes. Yes. Okay, somebody's just saying that Google search. Oh, good old Google. Nandina berries are toxic to birds due to small amounts of cyanide. I will follow up on that though, just to confirm that.
How do you attract purple martins?
Purple martins are aerial specialists. They need a long runway. They want a house that's 50 to 75 feet away from any trees on at least 3 of the 4 sides. If you're on a small lot in town with a lot of trees, you're not going to get them. You're not going to get them. So you need to have a wide open space and then get a martin house that's up 10 to 20 feet in the air. Once you get them coming, they will come fairly regularly. And that reminds me, I've got to get a purple martin house up pretty soon. But yeah, you need a lot of open air space. They want a clear approach coming right straight into it.
Okay, well, that takes care of what's in the chat. So let me just open it up for a few minutes for verbal questions. If anybody has any questions for Chuck, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask. Everybody becomes real shy when we do this.
If it was an in-person,
I know when we go back to in-person, nobody's going to ask questions.
Yeah, no, they ask questions. I never had that problem.
I have a question.
Okay.
This is Debbie Zabel. We put up a Purple Martin apartment complex. And the starlings have moved in.
Yep.
I know that's not good for purple martins, but is there a problem on our end of letting the starlings have the run of the place?
I would continue. Have you put it up already?
Yes, it's been up. Yeah.
Okay, I would take it down and start cleaning them out. Because I said we're still probably, I'm expecting if we don't, with the weather forecast, may have some show up yet this weekend. If not, it'll be after the rain here that's supposed to come in next week again. But they'll start hitting the state here within the next few days. So bring it down. Go ahead and I know some people that'll keep their martin houses shut up until they see the first purple martins around it. So I would try to, I said, I've got one that I maintain at a commercial property in town. I have not put it up yet because I haven't seen any reports of martins coming into the state yet. So just, yeah, keep it down, take the starling nests out, the house sparrows out. If you can close it up and put it back up so it's there, and then wait for the purple martins to come and then start opening up or just leave one or two of the nest boxes open.
I have a
Thank
quick
you.
question. How do you keep the woodpeckers from the house? What can you give them to?
What woodpeckers are, do you have a house that's not painted, but just natural siding?
No.
Okay.
They're
Are they actually excavating, or are they just making a lot of noise?
a lot of noise.
Okay. That is called drumming. That's caused by males with excessive levels of testosterone. It's drumming is when the woodpeckers get up on a metal chimney, on a dead log
Yeah,
in a tree,
exactly.
and they just go very, very fast. And
Yeah.
that's them saying to all the other male woodpeckers, hey, this is my territory. And to the
Okay.
female woodpeckers, it's, hey, look at me. I'm an attractive mate. So
Yeah.
it's what they do. It's, we had a flicker that would come to our house in town and would always pick the gutter right by the bedroom window on the mornings that we were trying to sleep in. So
Yeah.
it's a matter of time. Once they get into the nesting season, they'll stop.
Okay.
In the meantime, there's no real way to stop them.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
Any other questions out there? You want to raise your hand or go ahead and unmute and ask a question? No, looks like,
They're all ready to leave and go watch basketball games.
oh, that's true, I forgot. But there were lots of kudos in the chat box. Thank you. People learned a lot from this presentation, and it's perfectly timed with the warm weather coming out and people wanting to get out and see stuff, see the birds, watch
Absolutely.
things grow. So this has just been great. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I love talking about birds and to help other people enjoy the birds around them as well.
Yes, it's a perfect time. Things are starting. You walk out the door now and all you hear is bird song. It's just great.
My favorite time of the year.
Yes, so I would like to remind everybody that we do this once a month. And our next program is coming up. I have to fix it on our website. It's going to be a program by Laura Ross on daylilies. We've had to change that program. And I see Chris Sundstrom, our our former vice president on the video. Did you have something to say, Chris, about?
Just thank you so much. I'm so glad you came. Yeah.
Wonderful. So check in with us on April. I'm going to try to find the date real quick. April the 20th is our next program on daylilies. So hopefully you can join us there. And once again, if you have any questions and you want Chuck Otte's contact information, you can always contact me, Sharon Ashworth at Douglas County, if you didn't get that written down and any of the resources he mentioned. I put the crabapple publication in the chat, but if you have other questions, please give us a call. The Master Gardener hotline starts on April 4th. So give us a call. Thank you again, Chuck, and everybody go enjoy this beautiful day. Thank you.